Welcome to Slumbertainment. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself relax. Tonight we explore the history of medicine. Please like and subscribe for more restful content. Now, let's begin. Long before written language captured human knowledge, before cities rose from river valleys, before agriculture transformed wandering bands into settled communities, humans were already healers. The story of medicine begins not in gleaming laboratories or sterile operating rooms, but in the shadowed caves and open grasslands where our ancestors first noticed that certain plants eased pain, that particular rituals brought comfort, and that the natural world held secrets worth discovering. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans practiced medicine as far back as 50,000 years ago. In the Shanidar cave in northern Iraq, researchers discovered the burial site of a Neanderthal man surrounded by clusters of flower pollen. Analysis revealed these weren't random blooms, but specific medicinal plants, yarrow, cornflower, and groundsel among them, each known to possess healing properties. Whether this represented a symbolic gesture or practical knowledge of herbal medicine remains debated, but it demonstrates that even our evolutionary cousins recognize something significant in the relationship between plants and healing. The earliest surgical procedures leave more definitive marks. Trepanation, the practice of drilling or scraping holes into the human skull, appears in archaeological sites across the globe, from France to Peru, from Russia to North Africa. Skulls dating back to 7000 BCE show clear signs of this procedure, and remarkably, many show evidence of healing, indicating that patients survived the operation. Why ancient peoples performed trepanation remains partially mysterious. Some scholars suggest it treated head injuries or relieved pressure from fractures. Others propose it addressed seizures, headaches, or mental disorders, while some believe it served spiritual purposes, releasing evil spirits thought to cause illness. Regardless of intent, the procedure required remarkable anatomical knowledge, steady hands, and an understanding that survival depended on technique and aftercare. As humans transitioned from nomadic existence to agricultural settlements around 10,000 years ago, medical knowledge became more structured and transmissible. The first civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia, along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, in cities like Ur and Babylon, medicine evolved from purely empirical observation into a more systematic practice. Mesopotamian healers, known as Asu, practiced what might be considered the world's first clinical medicine. They diagnosed ailments, prescribed treatments, and kept detailed records on clay tablets that have survived millennia. These ancient physicians distinguished between different types of diseases and recognized that symptoms could indicate underlying conditions. The Code of Hammurabi, dating to 1750 BCE, included regulations governing medical practice and established fees for various procedures. It specified payments for successful operations and, notably, severe punishments for medical failures, a double-edged system that simultaneously elevated the status of physicians and held them accountable for the outcomes. The code differentiated between treating free men, commoners, and slaves, revealing how medicine intersected with social hierarchy from its earliest organized forms. Egyptian medicine, developing along the Nile River Valley around 3000 BCE, represents another crucial foundation of medical history. The ancient Egyptians possessed sophisticated anatomical knowledge derived partly from their elaborate mummification practices. The process of preserving bodies for the afterlife required removing internal organs, providing intimate familiarity with human anatomy that informed medical practice. Egyptian physicians specialized, some focusing exclusively on eyes, others on teeth, still others on internal ailments, an early recognition that medicine benefited from concentrated expertise. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to 1600 BCE but likely copied from texts centuries older, stands as one of humanity's oldest medical documents. Unlike many ancient medical texts that blend supernatural explanations with practical treatments, this papyrus approaches medicine with remarkable rationality. It describes 48 cases, mostly traumatic injuries, detailing examination procedures, diagnoses, prognoses, and treatments. The text introduces a structured approach: title, examination, diagnosis, treatment, and explanatory notes. For each case, the physician declares the condition curable, possibly curable, or incurable, an honest assessment that prioritized realistic expectations over false hope. Egyptian pharmacology was equally advanced. Physicians prescribed hundreds of different substances, from familiar ingredients like honey, known for antibacterial properties, to exotic imports obtained through extensive trade networks. They understood that dosage mattered, that timing of administration affected outcomes, and that combinations of ingredients could produce effects that individual components could not. Medical papyri contain prescriptions for conditions ranging from digestive complaints to eye infections, from burns to parasitic diseases, many of which remained endemic in the region's climate. Across the ancient world, in the Indus Valley civilization, another sophisticated medical tradition was developing. Archaeological excavations at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, cities flourishing from 2600 to 1900 BCE, reveal advanced urban planning that prioritized public health. These cities featured sophisticated drainage systems, public baths, and waste management infrastructure that wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. The civilization's apparent emphasis on cleanliness and sanitation suggests an intuitive understanding that environment influenced health, even without knowledge of microorganisms or disease transmission mechanisms. In ancient China, medical philosophy was taking distinctive shape by 1500 BCE. Rather than viewing the body as a collection of parts, Chinese medicine conceived of it as an integrated system where balance determined health. The concept of qi, vital energy flowing through the body along specific pathways called meridians, became fundamental to diagnosis and treatment. Acupuncture, the practice of inserting fine needles at specific points to influence qi flow, emerged during this period. Though its theoretical framework differs dramatically from Western biomedicine, archaeological evidence confirms its ancient practice, with stone and bone needles discovered at sites dating back thousands of years. These early medical traditions, developing independently across continents, shared common threads. All recognized that certain plants possessed healing properties. All developed surgical techniques, however crude by modern standards. All created frameworks for understanding disease and health, even when those frameworks invoked spirits, humours, or energy rather than pathogens and physiology. And all demonstrated that humans, faced with suffering, injury, and death, responded not with passive acceptance, but with innovation, observation, and the determination to heal. The foundations laid in these ancient civilizations would support millennia of medical advancement, each generation building on accumulated knowledge, each culture contributing unique insights that would eventually weave together into the complex tapestry of modern medicine. The eastern Mediterranean coastline, where azure waters meet rocky shores and olive groves climb hillsides, became the crucible for a medical revolution that would reshape how humanity understood the body, disease, and healing. Here, in ancient Greece beginning around the 6th century BCE, medicine began its transformation from a practice rooted primarily in tradition and supernatural belief into something approaching systematic inquiry and rational observation. Greek medicine emerged from a culture that valued philosophical inquiry and logical reasoning. While earlier civilizations had accumulated vast practical knowledge, Greek thinkers demanded explanations that relied on natural rather than supernatural causes. This shift in perspective, though gradual and incomplete, marked a fundamental turning point in medical history. The question was no longer simply what treatment worked, but why it worked, and how the human body functioned as a coherent system. Hippocrates, born around 460 BCE on the island of Kos, stands as perhaps the most influential figure in this transformation. Though much uncertainty surrounds his actual contributions versus those of his followers, the Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of roughly 60 medical texts attributed to him and his school, established principles that would guide medicine for 2 millennia. These writings emphasized careful observation, detailed record-keeping, and the importance of considering the whole patient rather than merely treating isolated symptoms. The Hippocratic approach rejected supernatural explanations for disease. The text On the Sacred Disease, addressing epilepsy, declares that this condition, like all others, has natural causes. This represented a radical departure from prevailing beliefs that attributed seizures to divine possession or demonic influence. By insisting that diseases arose from natural processes, Hippocratic medicine opened the door to rational investigation and treatment. Central to Greek medical theory was the concept of the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this framework, health depended on maintaining proper balance among these bodily fluids, while disease resulted from imbalance. Each humour associated with specific qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, and with particular organs and temperaments. Though scientifically incorrect by modern standards, humoral theory provided a coherent framework for understanding symptoms and guiding treatment. A patient with excess phlegm, manifesting as a cold with mucus production, required treatments that would dry and warm the body. Fever, indicating excess blood or yellow bile, called for cooling interventions. This theoretical framework led to specific therapeutic approaches. Bloodletting, the removal of blood through veins or with leeches, became standard practice for conditions attributed to excess blood. Dietary modifications aim to restore humoral balance, with specific foods classified according to their heating, cooling, moistening, or drying properties. Exercise, rest, and environmental changes all played roles in treatment plans designed to return the body to equilibrium. The Hippocratic Oath, though its exact origins and authorship remain debated, established ethical guidelines that continue to influence medical practice. It bound physicians to use their knowledge for healing rather than harm, to maintain patient confidentiality, and to avoid exploitation of the vulnerable. These principles acknowledged that medical knowledge conferred power and responsibility, that the relationship between physician and patient required trust and ethical boundaries. As Greek influence spread following Alexander the Great's conquests in the 4th century BCE, medical knowledge flowed to Alexandria in Egypt, which became the ancient world's preeminent centre of learning. Here, in the 3rd century BCE, anatomical study advanced dramatically. Herophilus and Erasistratus, working in Alexandria, performed systematic dissections of human cadavers, a practice generally forbidden in Greece proper due to cultural and religious prohibitions. Their investigations revealed the structure of the brain, distinguished between sensory and motor nerves, described the anatomy of the eye, and clarified the function of various organs. Herophilus recognized that the brain, not the heart, served as the center of intelligence and sensation. He described the ventricles of the brain and noted the connection between brain and nerves. His anatomical investigations of the reproductive system advanced understanding of human development. Erasistratus studied the heart's valves and proposed, remarkably presciently, that blood vessels carried air transformed from the lungs. Though incorrect in detail, this represented an attempt to explain physiological processes mechanistically rather than mystically. The Roman Empire, inheriting Greek medical knowledge as it expanded across the Mediterranean, adapted and disseminated these ideas throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Roman medicine initially relied heavily on folk remedies and religious healing, but Greek physicians, often arriving as slaves or immigrants, gradually introduced systematic medical practice. By the 1st century CE, Greek-trained doctors dominated Roman medical practice, and medical knowledge became increasingly standardized across the empire's vast territories. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, writing in the 1st century CE, produced De Medicina, an encyclopedic medical text that preserved much Greek medical knowledge for later generations. Though not a physician himself, Celsus synthesized existing knowledge into a comprehensive reference covering diet, pharmacology, and surgery. His descriptions of surgical procedures, including cataract removal, bladder stone extraction, and amputation techniques, demonstrated the sophistication Roman-era medicine had achieved. Galen of Pergamon, born in 129 CE, would become the ancient world's most influential medical authority, his works dominating European and Islamic medicine for over 1,000 years. Originally trained to care for gladiators, an education that provided extensive experience with traumatic injuries and anatomy, Galen later became physician to Roman emperors. His prolific writings, numbering in the hundreds of texts, covered anatomy, physiology, pathology, diagnosis, and treatment. Galen's anatomical knowledge derived primarily from dissecting animals, particularly Barbary apes, as human dissection had become increasingly restricted. He conducted elaborate experiments demonstrating that arteries carried blood, not air, as some theorized, by tying off vessels and observing the results. He investigated nerve function by systematically severing different spinal cord levels in living animals, observing which functions ceased at each level. His vivisection experiments, though troubling by modern ethical standards, revealed important physiological principles. Galen synthesized and systematized Greek medical knowledge, particularly humoral theory, into a comprehensive medical philosophy. He emphasized the importance of purpose in bodily design, believing that careful observation of anatomy revealed intelligent design with each structure serving specific functions. This teleological approach aligned well with later Christian and Islamic theological perspectives, partly explaining his enduring influence. His therapeutic approaches combined surgery, pharmacology, and regimen. He catalogued hundreds of medicinal compounds, specifying precise preparation methods and applications. His surgical techniques, particularly for treating wounds, fractures, and dislocations, drew on extensive practical experience. He stressed the importance of diet, exercise, and lifestyle in maintaining health and treating disease. The classical period established medicine as a learned profession requiring extensive training, systematic observation, and theoretical understanding. Greek and Roman physicians created frameworks for understanding the body, compiled extensive pharmacological knowledge, developed surgical techniques, and established ethical principles. Though many of their specific theories would eventually be overturned, their commitment to rational inquiry and empirical observation set a standard that would endure. As the Roman Empire fragmented and classical learning declined in Western Europe during the 5th and 6th centuries, medical knowledge found new guardians and innovators across different regions of the world. The medieval period, often mischaracterized as an era of stagnation, witnessed remarkable medical advances, though these occurred in places far from the collapsing Western Roman territories. The Islamic Golden Age, spanning roughly from the 8th to the 14th centuries, preserved and dramatically expanded upon Greek and Roman medical knowledge. As Islamic civilization spread from the Arabian Peninsula across North Africa, the Middle East, and into Spain and Central Asia, scholars translated classical texts into Arabic, creating vast libraries that housed medical works from diverse traditions. Greek texts by Hippocrates and Galen joined Indian Ayurvedic treatises and Persian medical writings, allowing Islamic physicians to synthesize knowledge from multiple civilizations. Baghdad, founded in 762 CE, became a center of medical learning and innovation. The city's House of Wisdom, established in the early 9th century, employed teams of translators and scholars who rendered Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit medical texts into Arabic. This wasn't mere preservation, however. Islamic physicians critically evaluated existing knowledge, conducted original research, and made discoveries that would profoundly influence later European medicine. The development of hospitals represented one of Islam's most significant medical contributions. While earlier civilizations had established places for caring for the sick, Islamic bimaristans were more sophisticated institutions, offering free care regardless of religion, gender, or social status. The first major hospital appeared in Baghdad around 800 CE, followed by increasingly elaborate facilities throughout the Islamic world. These institutions featured separate wards for different conditions, pharmacies, libraries, and lecture halls where physicians trained students at patients' bedsides. Medical education became formalized, with students progressing through structured curricula and examinations before practicing independently. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, known in Latin as Rhazes, born around 854 CE in Persia, exemplified the Islamic world's empirical approach to medicine. A prolific writer who composed over 200 works, al-Razi emphasized careful clinical observation and meticulous record-keeping. His treatise on smallpox and measles provided the first clear clinical distinction between these diseases, describing their symptoms, progression, and outcomes with precision that enabled other physicians to recognize and treat them. He advocated testing treatments systematically and advised against excessive intervention, recognizing that sometimes the body healed itself better without aggressive treatment. Al-Razi's comprehensive medical encyclopedia, Al-Hawi, compiled knowledge from Greek, Syrian, Indian, and Persian sources, alongside his own extensive clinical experience. This massive work, later translated into Latin as Continens, served European physicians for centuries. He maintained detailed case histories, recording symptoms, treatments, and outcomes, understanding that accumulated clinical experience could guide future practice. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, born in 980 CE near Bukhara, produced the Canon of Medicine, perhaps the most influential medical text ever written. This 5-volume work systematically organized all existing medical knowledge, covering anatomy, physiology, disease classification, diagnosis, treatment, and pharmacology. Ibn Sina refined humoral theory, described contagious diseases, recognized that tuberculosis spread from person to person, and discussed the psychological aspects of healing. His canon became the standard medical textbook in European universities for over 500 years, translated into Latin in the 12th century, and printed repeatedly after the invention of the printing press. Islamic physicians advanced surgery despite religious prohibitions against human dissection. Al-Zahrawi, known in Latin as Al-Bukassis, working in Cordoba, Spain, in the 10th and 11th centuries, wrote the Al-Tasrif, a 30-volume medical encyclopedia whose surgical section revolutionized the field. He described and illustrated over 200 surgical instruments, many of his own design, including specialized scalpels, forceps, cauteries, and tools for specific procedures. His techniques for treating skull fractures, removing bladder stones, and performing dental procedures influenced European surgery for centuries. Meanwhile, in China, medicine continued developing along distinctive paths. During the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, medical knowledge became increasingly systematized. The government established medical colleges and standardized pharmacological texts. The newly revised Materia Medica, completed in 659 CE, catalogued over 800 medicinal substances with detailed descriptions of their properties, preparations, and uses. Chinese physicians refined pulse diagnosis to extraordinary subtlety, identifying dozens of distinct pulse qualities that indicated specific conditions and imbalances. Acupuncture and moxibustion, the burning of medicinal herbs on specific body points, became more sophisticated. Detailed charts mapped the body's meridians and acupuncture points. The Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, saw the creation of bronze figures with marked acupuncture points used for teaching and examination. Chinese surgery, though less emphasized than in Islamic medicine, developed techniques for treating hernias, cataracts, and various injuries. In medieval Europe, medicine initially declined following Rome's fall. Monasteries preserved some classical texts, and monastic infirmaries provided basic care, but systematic medical practice largely disappeared. Folk healers, herbalists, and midwives served most people's medical needs, their knowledge transmitted orally and varying widely by region. Supernatural explanations for disease regained prominence, with illness often attributed to sin, demonic possession, or divine punishment. The establishment of universities in the 11th and 12th centuries gradually revitalized European medicine. The medical school at Salerno, Italy, emerged in the 9th century as Europe's first formal medical institution. By the 11th century, it attracted students from across Europe, offering structured training based on classical texts. The school admitted women as both students and teachers, unusual for the period, and produced important medical texts, including practical guides for diagnosis and treatment. The translation movement of the 12th and 13th centuries brought Arabic medical texts, themselves translations and expansions of Greek works, into Latin. European scholars travelled to Spain and Sicily, where Christian, Islamic, and Jewish cultures intersected, to access and translate these works. Gerard of Cremona alone translated over 70 Arabic texts into Latin, including Ibn Sina's, Canyon, and Al-Razi's writings. This massive influx of knowledge transformed European medicine, reintroducing systematic medical theory and practice. European universities increasingly included medical faculties, with Bologna, Paris, Montpellier, and Oxford establishing formal medical training. The curriculum centered on classical and Arabic texts, emphasizing theoretical knowledge over practical experience. Students studied Hippocrates, Galen, and Ibn Sina, learning humoral theory, diagnosis through pulse and urine examination, and the theoretical foundations of treatment. Practical training often came later, through apprenticeship with established physicians. The Black Death, arriving in Europe in 1347, exposed both the limitations of medieval medicine and the desperate need for effective treatments. The pandemic, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, though this remained unknown at the time, killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population. Physicians, working with inadequate theoretical frameworks, tried various treatments: bloodletting, theriac compounds, prayer and environmental modifications, but nothing proved effective against the plague. The catastrophe highlighted how much remained unknown about disease causation and transmission. Yet even amid such devastating failure, physicians made observations that would later prove important. Some noted that plague spread from person to person, suggesting quarantine measures. The concept of contagion, while not new, gained empirical support. Cities began implementing public health measures, isolating the sick, restricting travel, and improving sanitation. These represented early attempts at disease prevention on a societal scale. The medieval period, viewed globally, saw medicine advance significantly. Islamic physicians preserved and expanded classical knowledge while making original contributions to clinical practice, surgery, and pharmacology. Chinese medicine refined its distinctive approaches to diagnosis and treatment. Europe, after centuries of decline, began recovering classical and Islamic medical knowledge, setting the stage for later developments. Across these diverse traditions, physicians accumulated experience, refined techniques, and gradually built the foundation for medicine's continued evolution. The Renaissance, beginning in 14th century Italy and spreading across Europe over the following centuries, brought a renewed emphasis on direct observation of nature that would fundamentally transform medical understanding. This period witnessed the overthrow of ancient anatomical dogma, the beginning of experimental physiology, and the emergence of medicine as an empirical science grounded in careful investigation rather than deference to classical authority. Andreas Vesalius, born in 1514 in Brussels, revolutionized anatomy through meticulous dissection and illustration. Appointed professor of surgery at the University of Padua in Italy at just 23 years old, Vesalius personally performed dissections rather than merely lecturing from classical texts, while assistants cut into cadavers, the standard practice of his time. His hands-on approach revealed numerous errors in Galenic anatomy, which had dominated for over 1,000 years. Galen's anatomical descriptions, based primarily on animal dissection, contained inaccuracies when applied to human structures. Vesalius discovered that the human sternum has 3 parts, not 7 as Galen claimed, that the liver has 2 lobes rather than 5, and that the lower jaw consists of a single bone rather than 2 separate pieces. These and hundreds of other corrections demonstrated that authority, however ancient and revered, must yield to direct observation. In 1543, Vesalius published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, or On the Fabric of the Human Body, a monumental 7-volume work featuring detailed anatomical illustrations unlike anything previously produced. The woodcut illustrations, possibly created in the workshop of Titian, depicted the human body with unprecedented accuracy and artistic sophistication. The work progressed systematically through bones, muscles, blood vessels, nerves, and organs, each structure precisely rendered. More than just correcting errors, Vesalius established a new standard for anatomical investigation and presentation. The Fabrica represented more than technical achievement. It symbolized a philosophical shift toward empiricism, the notion that knowledge derives from direct observation and experience rather than textual authority. This principle, though seemingly obvious today, challenged centuries of scholarly tradition that prized ancient wisdom over contemporary investigation. Vesalius demonstrated that the ancients, despite their brilliance, could be wrong, and that progress required questioning rather than accepting established doctrine. William Harvey, born in 1578 in Folkestone, England, applied this empirical approach to understanding blood circulation. While physicians had observed blood flow for millennia, its mechanism remained mysterious. Galen had proposed that the liver continuously produced blood that the body consumed, with different types of blood moving through veins and arteries in separate systems. This theory, despite its inaccuracies, had satisfied medical thinking for over 1,000 years. Harvey, trained at Padua, where Vesalius had taught, conducted systematic experiments on living animals and careful observations of human anatomy. He calculated that the heart pumped far too much blood for the body to constantly produce and consume it. By tying off vessels and observing flow patterns, by studying valves in veins that permitted blood flow in only one direction, and by measuring the heart's capacity and beat rate, Harvey concluded that blood must circulate continuously through the body rather than being consumed and regenerated. In 1628, Harvey published De Motu Cordis, or On the Motion of the Heart and Blood, describing circulation as a closed loop. Blood left the heart through arteries, travelled to the body's periphery through vessels too small to see, and returned through veins to the heart, then passed through the lungs before beginning the cycle again. Though Harvey couldn't observe the tiny capillaries connecting arteries and veins, lacking the microscope necessary to see them, his logical deduction proved correct. Marcello Malpighi would later confirm capillaries' existence using early microscopes in 1661. Harvey's work exemplified the emerging scientific method, applying quantitative measurement, experimental manipulation, and logical deduction to solve physiological questions. His approach influenced subsequent generations of physicians and scientists, demonstrating that the body's mechanisms could be understood through systematic investigation. The invention and refinement of the microscope opened entirely new realms of medical investigation. Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch tradesman born in 1632, crafted remarkably powerful single-lens microscopes that magnified objects up to 270 times. With these instruments, he became the first person to observe bacteria, which he called animalcules, describing their shapes and movements in samples from tooth scrapings, rainwater, and other sources. He observed blood cells, sperm cells, and microscopic organisms in extraordinary detail, revealing an invisible world teeming with life. Robert Hooke, working in England, published Micrographia in 1665, featuring stunning illustrations of objects viewed through his compound microscope. His observations of cork revealed tiny chambers he termed cells, introducing this fundamental concept to biology. Though he observed only dead cell walls, the term endured, and the recognition that organisms consisted of these basic structural units would eventually revolutionize medical understanding. Meanwhile, advances in chemistry began transforming pharmacology. Paracelsus, a controversial Swiss physician born in 1493, challenged Galenic humoral theory and advocated for chemical rather than plant-based medicines. Though many of his ideas proved incorrect and his confrontational style antagonized contemporaries, he pioneered the use of minerals and chemicals in treatment, including compounds of mercury, sulfur, and iron. His emphasis on dosage, captured in his famous statement that the dose makes the poison, recognized that therapeutic benefit depended on precise amounts. The 17th century saw the establishment of scientific societies that accelerated medical progress through collaboration and communication. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660, and the French Academy of Sciences, established in 1666, provided forums where physicians and natural philosophers shared observations, debated theories, and coordinated research. Scientific journals began publishing medical findings, allowing knowledge to spread more rapidly than ever before. Surgical techniques gradually improved, though surgery remained dangerous and agonizing without effective anesthesia or antiseptic practices. Ambroise Paré, a French military surgeon born in 1510, revolutionized battlefield medicine. Rather than cauterizing gunshot wounds with boiling oil, the standard but excruciating practice, he developed gentler treatments using salves and clean dressings. He improved amputation techniques, designed innovative prosthetic limbs, and pioneered ligature of blood vessels to control bleeding during surgery. His innovations saved countless lives and demonstrated that surgical practice could advance through careful observation and humane consideration of patient suffering. The anatomical theatres that appeared in European universities during this period reflected medicine's increasingly public and educational character. In Padua, Leiden, and other cities, circular amphitheatres allowed students and interested citizens to observe dissections. These events, often conducted in winter when cold preserved bodies longer, combined education, entertainment, and demonstration of medical knowledge. The theatres symbolised medicine's growing confidence and its claim to understand the body through systematic investigation. By the 18th century's dawn, medicine had undergone profound transformation. The human body's structure was accurately mapped. Blood circulation was understood, microscopic life had been discovered, and the scientific method was increasingly applied to medical questions. Yet enormous challenges remained. Physicians still lacked understanding of disease causation, possessed few effective treatments, and operated without anesthesia or antisepsis. The foundations were laid, however, for the revolutionary discoveries that would follow. The 19th century witnessed medicine's transformation from an art based largely on tradition and theory into a science grounded in verifiable discoveries about disease causation. Two fundamental breakthroughs, vaccination and germ theory, would save more lives than all previous medical advances combined, fundamentally altering humanity's relationship with infectious disease. The story of vaccination begins with a deadly scourge. Smallpox, caused by the variola virus, had killed and disfigured millions throughout human history. The disease produced characteristic pustular lesions covering the body, killed roughly 30% of those infected, and left survivors often scarred and sometimes blind. No effective treatment existed, and the disease struck rich and poor, young and old, with terrifying unpredictability. Variolation, the practice of deliberately infecting people with material from smallpox lesions to produce a milder case and subsequent immunity, had been practiced for centuries in China, India, and parts of Africa, before reaching Europe in the early 18th century. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, wife of the British ambassador to Constantinople, observed the practice in the Ottoman Empire and had her own children variolated. The technique offered protection but carried significant risk. Some variolated individuals died from the procedure itself, and the practice could spread smallpox to others. Edward Jenner, an English country doctor born in 1749, made a crucial observation. Milkmaids who contracted cowpox, a mild disease causing lesions on the hands, seemed immune to smallpox. Cowpox produced temporary discomfort but rarely proved serious, yet it apparently protected against its deadly relative. Jenner hypothesized that deliberate cowpox infection might safely prevent smallpox. In 1796, Jenner tested his theory in an experiment that would be considered highly unethical today, but would change medical history. He took material from a cowpox lesion on a milkmaid's hand and inoculated 8-year-old James Phipps, the son of his gardener. The boy developed mild symptoms and recovered. Weeks later, Jenner inoculated Phipps with smallpox material. The boy did not develop smallpox. Jenner had demonstrated that cowpox provided protection against smallpox without smallpox's dangers. Jenner published his findings in 1798, coining the term vaccination from vacca, the Latin word for cow. The practice spread rapidly despite initial skepticism and resistance. Critics argued that introducing animal material into humans was unnatural or dangerous, while religious objections claimed vaccination interfered with divine will. Nevertheless, vaccination's effectiveness became undeniable. Countries implementing widespread vaccination programs saw smallpox deaths plummet. The principle underlying vaccination, that exposure to weakened or related pathogens could generate immunity, would eventually enable prevention of numerous diseases. Yet Jenner didn't understand why vaccination worked. That explanation required discoveries about disease causation that wouldn't emerge for decades. The question of what caused disease had occupied medical thinking for millennia. Humoral theory had long provided the dominant explanation, attributing illness to imbalances in bodily fluids. Some physicians suspected that tiny organisms might cause disease, but the theory remained speculative without convincing evidence. The microscope had revealed microorganisms' existence, but their relationship to disease remained unclear. Louis Pasteur, a French chemist born in 1822, made discoveries that would establish germ theory and revolutionize medicine. Initially investigating fermentation for the wine industry, Pasteur demonstrated that microorganisms caused the process. Wine and beer spoiled, he showed, because unwanted microbes contaminated them. Heating liquids to specific temperatures, a process now called pasteurization, killed these organisms and prevented spoilage. Pasteur extended this reasoning to disease. If microorganisms cause fermentation and spoilage, might they also cause illness? Through ingenious experiments, he demonstrated that specific microorganisms cause specific diseases. He studied silkworm diseases devastating the French silk industry, identifying the parasites responsible and developing methods to prevent infection. He investigated anthrax in livestock, identifying the bacterium Bacillus anthracis as the causative agent. Most dramatically, Pasteur developed a rabies vaccine despite never seeing the virus, which was too small for microscopes of his era to detect. He reasoned that something in the saliva of rabid animals caused the disease, and that this agent might be weakened to create a vaccine. By passing the disease through rabbits and drying infected spinal cords, he created a preparation that prevented rabies in dogs. In 1885, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister arrived at Pasteur's laboratory, savagely bitten by a rabid dog and facing near certain death. Pasteur, though not a physician, administered his experimental vaccine. The boy survived, providing dramatic proof that vaccination could be extended beyond smallpox. Robert Koch, a German physician born in 1843, systematized the study of disease-causing microorganisms. He developed methods for culturing bacteria in pure strains, staining them for microscopic observation and photographing them. Most importantly, he established rigorous criteria, now known as Koch's postulates, for proving that a specific microorganism causes a specific disease. The organism must be found in all cases of the disease, must be isolated and grown in pure culture, must cause disease when introduced into a healthy host, and must be recovered from the experimentally infected host. Koch identified the bacteria responsible for tuberculosis in 1882 and cholera in 1883, both major killers of his era. His tuberculosis announcement, delivered at a scientific meeting in Berlin, stunned the medical community. Tuberculosis, which killed roughly 1 in 7 people in Europe and North America, had a specific identifiable cause. This meant it could potentially be prevented or treated. Germ theory revolutionized medical practice. If microorganisms cause disease, preventing their transmission became paramount. Joseph Lister, a British surgeon born in 1827, applied these insights to surgery. Operating rooms of his era were filthy by modern standards. Surgeons operated in street clothes, used unwashed instruments, and thought nothing of moving directly from autopsy to surgery without hand-washing. Post-surgical infections killed enormous numbers of patients, accepted as an inevitable consequence of operations. Lister reasoned that if germs caused wound infections, antiseptic techniques might prevent them. Beginning in 1865, he implemented protocols using carbolic acid to sterilize instruments, clean wounds, and disinfect surgical environments. He instructed surgeons to wash hands thoroughly and wear clean garments. The results were remarkable. Infection rates in his surgical ward dropped dramatically, and survival rates improved substantially. Initially, many surgeons resisted antiseptic surgery, finding Lister's protocols cumbersome and doubting germ theory. Gradually, as evidence accumulated, resistance faded. The introduction of sterile surgical gloves, masks, and gowns further reduced infection. Surgery, previously a last resort fraught with danger, became increasingly safe and effective. The acceptance of germ theory and the implementation of vaccination and antiseptic practices marked a watershed in medical history. For the first time, physicians understood a fundamental mechanism of disease and possessed tools to prevent it. The implications extended beyond individual treatment to public health. Cities implemented sanitation measures, water treatment systems, and sewage management based on understanding that contaminated water and poor sanitation spread disease. Mortality rates, particularly infant and child mortality, began declining as infectious diseases became increasingly controllable. The 19th century closed with medicine transformed. The ancient mystery of disease causation had been solved, at least for infectious diseases. The 20th century would build on these foundations to create an arsenal of vaccines, antibiotics, and public health measures that would dramatically extend human life expectancy and reduce suffering on an unprecedented scale. Surgery before the mid-19th century was a brutal ordeal. Patients endured unimaginable agony as surgeons worked with desperate speed, racing against shock, blood loss, and the patient's capacity to withstand pain. Operations were limited to procedures that could be completed in minutes. Amputations, tumour removals, and stone extractions performed while patients screamed and struggled against restraints. The fastest surgeons were considered the best, not for their precision but for their ability to minimise suffering through speed. The search for pain relief during surgery had occupied medical practitioners for centuries. Opium, alcohol, and various herbs provided some dulling of sensation, but nothing approaching the complete unconsciousness necessary for complex operations. Patients sometimes lost consciousness from shock or were knocked senseless by blows to the head, but these were hardly reliable or safe methods. The barrier was both technical and conceptual, finding substances that could reliably produce reversible unconsciousness without killing the patient. The breakthrough came almost simultaneously from multiple investigators in the 1840s. Nitrous oxide, ether, and chloroform all showed promise as anesthetic agents, their properties discovered partly through recreational use. Travelling shows featured volunteers inhaling gases that produced giddiness and insensibility to pain, demonstrations that seemed more entertainment than medical revelation. Horace Wells, a dentist in Hartford, Connecticut, attended such a demonstration in 1844. He noticed that a volunteer who injured himself while under nitrous oxide's influence seemed to feel no pain. Wells immediately recognized the potential and arranged to have a tooth extracted while breathing the gas. The procedure succeeded painlessly, and Wells began using nitrous oxide in his dental practice. An attempted public demonstration at Massachusetts General Hospital went poorly when the patient cried out, and Wells' discovery was initially dismissed. William Morton, another dentist who had worked with Wells, experimented with ether instead of nitrous oxide. On October 16, 1846, Morton administered ether to a patient before John Collins Warren performed surgery to remove a neck tumour at Massachusetts General Hospital. the operation proceeded without the patient crying out in pain. Warren, concluding the successful surgery, reportedly announced to assembled observers that this was no humbug. News of successful surgical anaesthesia spread rapidly across the Atlantic and around the world. James Simpson in Edinburgh introduced chloroform as an anaesthetic in 1847, finding it more potent and faster acting than ether. Chloroform gained popularity despite being more dangerous, causing cardiac complications in some patients. The debate over which anaesthetic was safest would continue for decades, driving research into pharmacology and dosing that advanced medical understanding of how drugs affected the body. Anaesthesia transformed surgery from a desperate last resort into an increasingly safe and sophisticated intervention. Surgeons could now work deliberately, exploring anatomy with care, developing new techniques and attempting procedures previously impossible. The combination of anaesthesia and antiseptic practices created what medical historians call the golden age of surgery. Surgical specialization emerged as practitioners focused on specific organ systems or types of procedures. Theodor Billroth in Vienna pioneered gastrointestinal surgery, performing the first successful stomach resection in 1881. William Halsted at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore developed radical mastectomy for breast cancer and established surgical residency training programs that became the model for modern surgical education. Harvey Cushing advanced neurosurgery, developing techniques for operating on the brain and spinal cord with increasing success. The introduction of X-rays in 1895 provided surgeons and physicians with an entirely new diagnostic tool. Wilhelm Röntgen, a German physicist, discovered that mysterious rays produced by his experimental apparatus could pass through soft tissue and create shadow images of bones and dense objects. The first X-ray photograph showed Röntgen's wife's hand, bones clearly visible with her wedding ring on one finger. Within months, physicians worldwide were using X-rays to locate fractures, bullets, and other abnormalities inside living patients without surgery. Medical imaging revolutionized diagnosis. Physicians could finally see inside the body without cutting it open, identifying problems, tracking disease progression, and verifying treatment success. Tuberculosis could be detected in lungs, fractures precisely located, and foreign objects found and removed. The technology was imperfect and dangerous. Early X-ray operators often suffered radiation burns and cancers, but its value was undeniable. The early 20th century brought profound advances in understanding human physiology and biochemistry. Scientists isolated vitamins, discovering that tiny amounts of specific compounds were essential for health. Frederick Banting and Charles Best isolated insulin in 1921, transforming diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition. Before insulin, children diagnosed with type 1 diabetes typically died within months. Insulin injections allowed diabetic patients to survive and live relatively normal lives. Karl Landsteiner's discovery of blood types in 1901 made blood transfusions safe and practical. Physicians had attempted transfusions for centuries with unpredictable results. Some patients improved while others died from mysterious reactions. Landsteiner demonstrated that blood came in distinct types A, B, AB, and O, and that incompatible transfusions caused deadly immune reactions. Matching blood types before transfusion dramatically improved outcomes, enabling surgeons to replace blood lost during operations and trauma. Blood banking developed during World War I, driven by the need to treat massive casualties. Methods for storing blood with anticoagulants allowed collection in advance of need, creating reserves for emergencies. By World War II, blood banking was sophisticated enough to supply entire armies, saving countless lives on battlefields and in civilian hospitals. Endocrinology emerged as physicians recognized that glands, secreting hormones, regulated numerous bodily functions. The thyroid, adrenal glands, pituitary, and other endocrine organs produced chemical messengers affecting growth, metabolism, reproduction, and stress response. Understanding hormonal systems enabled treatment of previously mysterious conditions. Thyroid hormone treated hypothyroidism, cortisone addressed adrenal insufficiency, and growth hormone helped children with deficiencies. Psychiatry evolved from custodial care of the insane to attempts at systematic treatment. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theories, whatever their scientific limitations, established that mental conditions could be addressed through talking therapy. Emil Kraepelin classified mental disorders systematically, distinguishing conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Though effective treatments remained limited, the recognition that mental illness deserved medical attention rather than mere confinement represented progress. The period between 1850 and 1930 witnessed medicine's transformation into its modern form. Anesthesia eliminated surgical pain, antisepsis and asepsis prevented infection, X-rays revealed the body's interior, blood transfusions replaced lost blood, hormones and vitamins addressed deficiency diseases, and specialization allowed deep expertise. Medical education became rigorous and standardized. Hospitals evolved into centers of scientific care rather than warehouses for the dying, and the profession increasingly delivered measurable benefits to patients. Yet medicine's greatest triumph still lay ahead. Infectious diseases, though better understood, remained major killers. Bacterial pneumonia, tuberculosis, infected wounds, and countless other bacterial infections killed millions annually. Doctors could identify the causative organisms, but possessed no way to kill them inside the human body without killing the patient. That would change with medicine's next revolution, the antibiotic era. The discovery of antibiotics stands among humanity's greatest achievements, a breakthrough that altered the trajectory of human health more profoundly than perhaps any other medical advance. Before antibiotics, a simple scratch could prove fatal if it became infected, childbirth carried enormous risk from puerperal fever, and epidemics of bacterial diseases swept through populations with devastating regularity. The transformation that antibiotics brought seems almost miraculous in retrospect, turning previously deadly infections into minor inconveniences. Alexander Fleming, a Scottish bacteriologist working at St Mary's Hospital in London, made the pivotal discovery in 1928 through a combination of scientific insight and fortunate accident. Fleming had been studying Staphylococcus bacteria, growing cultures in petri dishes in his laboratory. Returning from vacation in September, he noticed that one culture plate had been contaminated with mold, not an unusual occurrence in laboratories of that era. What caught his attention was that bacteria near the mold had died, creating a clear zone where no bacterial colonies grew. Rather than dismissing this as mere contamination, Fleming investigated. He identified the mold as belonging to the genus Penicillium and demonstrated that it produced a substance that killed various bacteria. He named this substance penicillin and published his findings in 1929. Fleming recognized penicillin's potential, but lacked the chemical expertise to purify and concentrate it for medical use. The discovery lay largely dormant for over a decade. Howard Florey and Ernst Boris Chain, working at Oxford University, returned to Fleming's work in the late 1930s. With war approaching and military medicine desperately needing better treatments for infected wounds, they focused on isolating and purifying penicillin. By 1940, they had produced enough pure penicillin to test on infected mice. The results were dramatic. Infected mice treated with penicillin survived, while untreated controls died. The team moved to human trials in 1941. The first patient was Albert Alexander, a policeman dying from a severe bacterial infection that had spread through his body after a scratch from a rose thorn. Despite receiving the limited penicillin supply the Oxford team could produce, Alexander improved remarkably. Unfortunately, the supply ran out before the infection was completely eliminated, and he eventually died. Subsequent trials with more adequate supplies demonstrated penicillin's extraordinary effectiveness against bacterial infections. Mass production posed enormous challenges. Growing enough penicillium mold and extracting sufficient penicillin required industrial-scale facilities that didn't exist. With Britain focused on war production, Florey travelled to the United States seeking assistance. American pharmaceutical companies, supported by government funding, developed fermentation techniques that dramatically increased penicillin yields. By D-Day in 1944, penicillin was available in sufficient quantities to treat Allied soldiers, preventing countless deaths from infected wounds that would have been fatal in previous wars. Penicillin's success sparked intensive searches for other antibiotics. Salman Waxman at Rutgers University systematically screened soil microorganisms for antibiotic properties, reasoning that organisms competing in soil might produce substances to inhibit rivals. In 1943, his team isolated streptomycin from soil bacteria, the first effective treatment for tuberculosis. This discovery earned Waxman the Nobel Prize and introduced the term antibiotic, meaning against life, to describe these bacterial-killing substances. The post-war period saw an explosion of antibiotic discoveries. Chloramphenicol, tetracycline, erythromycin, and numerous other antibiotics emerged from pharmaceutical laboratories worldwide. Each had different properties. Some worked against bacteria resistant to others. Some were better absorbed when taken orally. Others had fewer side effects. Physicians gained an arsenal of weapons against bacterial disease. The impact on public health was staggering. Diseases that had killed for millennia became curable. Pneumonia, strep throat, scarlet fever, syphilis, and many other bacterial infections could be treated with pills or injections. Surgical complications from infection declined dramatically. Childbirth became far safer as puerperal fever became treatable. Life expectancy in developed countries increased substantially, with antibiotics contributing significantly to this improvement. The pharmaceutical industry transformed during this period, becoming a major economic force and research powerhouse. Drug development became increasingly sophisticated, requiring extensive chemistry, pharmacology, and clinical testing. The process of bringing new drugs to market became more regulated following tragedies like the thalidomide disaster in the early 1960s, when a drug prescribed for morning sickness caused severe birth defects. Regulatory agencies demanded proof of both safety and efficacy before approving medications. Beyond antibiotics, pharmaceutical research produced medications for chronic conditions previously difficult or impossible to treat. Antihypertensive drugs controlled high blood pressure, reducing strokes and heart attacks. Antipsychotic medications helped manage schizophrenia and other severe mental illnesses, emptying psychiatric institutions and allowing patients to live in communities. Antidepressants treated depression and anxiety disorders. Cholesterol-lowering drugs prevented cardiovascular disease. The development of oral contraceptives in the 1960s revolutionized reproductive health and had profound social consequences. Women gained unprecedented control over fertility, enabling career planning and family spacing previously impossible. The pill, as it became known, combined synthetic versions of estrogen and progesterone to prevent ovulation. Its development required understanding hormonal regulation of the menstrual cycle, synthesis of active compounds, and clinical trials demonstrating safety and efficacy. Immunology advanced rapidly, revealing how the body defended against infection and foreign substances. Researchers discovered that the immune system distinguished self from non-self through complex molecular recognition, that specialized cells attacked invaders through various mechanisms, and that vaccination worked by training immune memory. This understanding enabled development of immunosuppressive drugs that prevented organ transplant rejection, making kidney, heart, and liver transplantation feasible. Chemotherapy for cancer emerged from unlikely origins. Observations of soldiers exposed to mustard gas during World War I showed that the chemical destroyed rapidly dividing cells, including those in bone marrow and lymph nodes. Researchers reasoned that substances toxic to dividing cells might treat cancer, which involves uncontrolled cell division. Early chemotherapy drugs were crude and highly toxic, producing terrible side effects, but they could induce remission in some cancers, particularly leukemias and lymphomas. Combination chemotherapy, using multiple drugs with different mechanisms, improved outcomes while reducing resistance. The pharmaceutical approach to disease represented a fundamental shift in medical practice. Rather than merely alleviating symptoms or supporting the body's healing, modern drugs could directly target disease mechanisms. Antibiotics killed bacteria, antihypertensives dilated blood vessels, insulin replaced deficient hormone, and chemotherapy destroyed cancer cells. Medicine became increasingly interventionist and molecular, focusing on specific biochemical targets. Yet this revolution brought new challenges. Antibiotic resistance emerged as bacteria evolved mechanisms to survive drug exposure. Overuse and misuse of antibiotics accelerated this process, creating strains resistant to multiple drugs. The initial optimism that infectious disease had been conquered gave way to recognition that the battle was ongoing, requiring constant development of new antibiotics to stay ahead of bacterial evolution. Drug side effects and interactions created complications. Powerful medications could produce serious adverse reactions, sometimes worse than the conditions they treated. Thalidomide's tragic legacy led to stricter testing requirements, but even extensive trials couldn't identify all potential problems, particularly rare reactions or long-term effects. The cost of drug development and healthcare more broadly became contentious issues. Developing new medications required enormous investments in research, testing, and regulatory approval. Pharmaceutical companies needed to recoup these costs and generate profits, leading to high drug prices that put some treatments beyond reach for many patients. Balancing innovation incentives with affordable access remained an unresolved tension. Despite these challenges, the pharmaceutical revolution fundamentally changed human health. Conditions that had been death sentences became manageable. Suffering that had been inevitable became preventable. Average lifespans increased dramatically. The discovery and development of antibiotics and other modern drugs represented one of medicine's finest achievements, testament to what systematic research and industrial-scale collaboration could accomplish. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed an explosion of medical technology that transformed diagnosis and treatment. Machines that could see inside living bodies without surgery, computers that could store and analyze patient data, and instruments that could manipulate individual cells opened possibilities previous generations could scarcely imagine. Medicine became increasingly dependent on sophisticated technology, fundamentally changing how physicians understood disease and delivered care. Diagnostic imaging evolved far beyond simple X-rays. Computed tomography, or CT scanning, emerged in the 1970s, using X-rays and computer processing to create detailed cross-sectional images of the body. Godfrey Hounsfield in England and Alan Cormack in the United States independently developed the mathematical and technical foundations for CT scanning, earning the Nobel Prize in 1979. Unlike traditional X-rays that produced flat shadow images, Connecticut scans revealed internal structures in 3 dimensions with remarkable clarity, distinguishing between tissues of similar density and precisely locating tumours, bleeding, and other abnormalities. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, provided even greater detail without using radiation. Based on the behaviour of hydrogen atoms in strong magnetic fields, MRI scanners created extraordinarily detailed images of soft tissues. The brain, spinal cord, joints, and internal organs could be visualised with precision impossible with other techniques. MRI proved especially valuable for neurological conditions, revealing brain tumours, strokes, and degenerative diseases with unprecedented clarity. The technology's development in the 1970s and 80s by researchers including Raymond Demardian, Paul Lauterbur, and Peter Mansfield represented a triumph of physics applied to medicine. Ultrasound imaging, using high-frequency sound waves reflected off internal structures, became routine in obstetrics and cardiology. Pregnant women could see their developing babies, physicians could examine heart valve function in real time, and radiologists could guide biopsies with ultrasound visualization. The technology was safe, relatively inexpensive, and portable, making it accessible even in resource-limited settings. Positron emission tomography, or PET scanning, revealed metabolic activity rather than just anatomical structure. By tracking radioactive traces that concentrated in metabolically active tissues, PET scans could identify cancerous tumours, assess heart muscle viability, and visualize brain function. Combined with CT or MRI, for anatomical context, PET scanning provided both structural and functional information, enabling more accurate diagnosis and treatment planning. These imaging technologies revolutionized medical practice. Physicians could diagnose conditions earlier and more accurately, monitor treatment response precisely, and plan surgical approaches with detailed knowledge of anatomy. Non-invasive diagnosis reduced the need for exploratory surgery, decreasing risk and recovery time. The phrase, "let's take a look," acquired new meaning when looking inside the body became routine rather than exceptional. Organ transplantation advanced from experimental procedure to established treatment for end-stage organ failure. The first successful kidney transplant between identical twins occurred in 1954, but broader application required solving the rejection problem. The immune system recognized transplanted organs as foreign and attacked them unless suppressed. Early immunosuppressive drugs had severe side effects and limited effectiveness. The discovery of cyclosporine in the 1970s transformed transplantation. This fungus-derived compound selectively suppressed the immune response against transplanted organs without completely destroying immune function. Transplant success rates improved dramatically. Heart, liver, lung, and pancreas transplantation became feasible, offering life-saving options for patients with failing organs. Tissue typing improved organ matching, reducing rejection risk. Organ procurement and preservation techniques advanced, allowing longer times between donation and transplantation. National organ sharing networks emerged to match donors with recipients efficiently. Despite ongoing challenges with organ shortage and long-term immunosuppression complications, transplantation saved thousands of lives annually. Minimally invasive surgery developed alongside imaging advances. Laparoscopy, using small incisions and fibre optic cameras to guide instruments inside the body, reduced surgical trauma dramatically. Procedures that once required large incisions and extended hospital stays could be performed through tiny openings, with patients often returning home the same day. Gallbladder removal, appendectomy, and numerous other operations became routine laparoscopic procedures. Robotic surgery enhanced precision further. Surgical robots translated surgeon movements into finer, steadier motions of miniature instruments, enabling delicate procedures in confined spaces. Though expensive and technically demanding, robotic systems expanded surgical capabilities, particularly for prostate surgery, cardiac procedures, and other operations requiring extraordinary precision. Molecular biology and genetics transformed medicine at the most fundamental level. The discovery of DNA's structure by James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953 laid groundwork for understanding heredity at the molecular level. As techniques for analyzing DNA developed, the genetic basis of many diseases became clear. Some conditions resulted from single gene mutations. Others involved complex interactions among multiple genes and environmental factors. Genetic testing allowed identification of disease risk and carrier status. Parents could learn whether they carried genes for inherited disorders. Individuals could assess their risk for conditions like breast cancer with hereditary components, and prenatal testing could detect genetic abnormalities in developing fetuses. These capabilities raised profound ethical questions about privacy, discrimination, and reproductive choice, questions that society continues grappling with. The Human Genome Project, an international effort launched in 1990, aimed to map all human genes. Completed in 2003, the project identified approximately 20,000 to 25,000 genes and determined the sequence of 3 billion base pairs comprising human DNA. This massive undertaking, requiring new sequencing technologies and computational methods, provided a foundation for understanding genetic contributions to disease and individual variation in drug response. Pharmacogenomics emerged as it became clear that genetic differences affected how people metabolized medications. Some individuals broke down drugs rapidly, requiring higher doses for effect, while others metabolized drugs slowly, experiencing toxicity at standard doses. Understanding these variations enabled more personalized dosing and drug selection, improving efficacy and reducing adverse reactions. Cancer treatment became increasingly targeted as molecular understanding advanced. Rather than treating all cancers of a particular organ similarly, oncologists classified tumors by genetic and molecular characteristics. Some breast cancers had estrogen receptors that could be blocked with specific drugs. Others lacked these receptors but had different vulnerabilities. Chronic myeloid leukemia responded to drugs targeting specific molecular abnormalities in cancer cells. This precision approach improved outcomes while reducing unnecessary toxicity. Monoclonal antibodies, engineered proteins designed to bind specific molecular targets, became powerful therapeutic tools. They could mark cancer cells for immune destruction, block growth signals tumors required, or deliver toxic payloads directly to malignant cells. Rituximab for lymphoma, trastuzumab for breast cancer, and numerous other monoclonal antibodies transformed treatment for conditions previously difficult to manage. Medical informatics emerged as computers became integral to healthcare. Electronic health records replaced paper charts, making patient information instantly accessible to authorized providers anywhere. Clinical decision support systems alerted physicians to drug interactions, suggested diagnoses based on symptoms, and reminded them of preventive care measures. Telemedicine enabled remote consultations, bringing specialist expertise to underserved areas. The late 20th century closed with medicine transformed by technology. imaging revealed the body's interior in extraordinary detail. Transplantation replaced failing organs, molecular biology explained disease at the genetic level, and computers managed the enormous complexity of modern medical information. Yet this technological sophistication brought new challenges, including rising costs, concerns about over-testing and over-treatment, and questions about maintaining human connection in increasingly mechanized care. Medicine had gained unprecedented power, but faced difficult questions about how to wield it wisely. The 21st century has brought medicine into an era of unprecedented capability alongside persistent and emerging challenges. While wealthy nations enjoy access to treatments that would have seemed miraculous decades ago, global health disparities remain stark. Infectious diseases continue evolving, and chronic conditions increasingly dominate the disease burden. Contemporary medicine operates at the intersection of remarkable scientific achievement and profound questions about equity, sustainability, and the limits of intervention. The rapid development of vaccines against COVID-19 demonstrated modern medicine's capacity for swift response to emerging threats. When SARS-CoV-2 appeared in late 2019, triggering a global pandemic, vaccine development traditionally requiring years or decades was compressed into months. Messenger RNA vaccine technology, researched for years but never before deployed at scale, proved remarkably effective. The Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines used synthetic mRNA to instruct human cells to produce viral spike protein, training immune systems to recognize and combat the actual virus. This approach, fundamentally different from traditional vaccines using weakened or inactivated viruses, represented a new paradigm in vaccine development. The pandemic response revealed both medicine's strengths and vulnerabilities. Scientific collaboration occurred at unprecedented speed and scale, with researchers worldwide sharing data, coordinating trials, and accelerating regulatory review without compromising safety standards. Yet global vaccine distribution exposed deep inequities, with wealthy nations securing supplies while poorer countries struggled to access doses. The pandemic demonstrated that infectious disease anywhere threatens health everywhere, but also that international cooperation and resource sharing remain inadequate. Immunotherapy revolutionized cancer treatment in recent years. Rather than attacking cancer cells directly with chemotherapy or radiation, immunotherapy harnesses the patient's immune system. CAR T-cell therapy, approved in 2017, involves extracting immune cells from patients, genetically engineering them to recognize cancer-specific markers, multiplying them in laboratories, and infusing them back into patients where they seek and destroy malignant cells. This approach has achieved remarkable success against certain blood cancers, producing complete remissions in patients who had exhausted other options. Checkpoint inhibitors, another immunotherapy approach, release brakes on immune responses that cancers exploit to avoid detection. Tumours often produce signals that suppress immune attack, allowing them to grow unchecked. Drugs blocking these signals unleash immune cells to recognize and eliminate cancer. These therapies have transformed treatment for melanoma, lung cancer, and other malignancies, though they work only in subsets of patients and can cause severe autoimmune side effects. Gene therapy, long a distant promise, has begun delivering on its potential. Diseases caused by single gene defects increasingly have treatments replacing or correcting faulty genes. Luxturna, approved in 2017, treats a rare inherited form of blindness by delivering working copies of a defective gene directly to retinal cells. Zolgensma treats spinal muscular atrophy, a devastating genetic disorder, with a single infusion containing functional copies of the missing gene. These therapies carry staggering costs, raising difficult questions about pricing, access, and healthcare sustainability. CRISPR-Cas. 9-gene editing technology, discovered in 2012, enables precise modification of DNA sequences. Originally a bacterial immune system, CRISPR was adapted for editing human genes with unprecedented accuracy and ease. Clinical trials are exploring CRISPR for sickle cell disease, beta thalassemia, and other genetic conditions. The technology also raises profound ethical concerns, particularly regarding germline editing that would affect future generations. The birth of gene-edited babies in China in 2018, widely condemned as reckless and unethical, highlighted the need for international governance of powerful genetic technologies. Artificial intelligence increasingly assists medical decision-making. Machine learning algorithms analyze medical images, sometimes matching or exceeding human radiologist performance in detecting abnormalities. AI systems predict patient deterioration hours before clinical signs appear, suggest diagnoses based on symptoms and test results, and identify patients at high risk for various conditions. Natural language processing extracts information from medical records, identifying patterns invisible to human review. Yet AI in medicine faces significant challenges. Algorithms trained on data from one population may perform poorly in others, potentially exacerbating health disparities. The black box nature of some AI systems, where decision-making processes are opaque even to designers, raises concerns about accountability and trust. Integration into clinical workflows remains difficult, with physicians sometimes uncertain when to rely on algorithmic suggestions versus their own judgment. Chronic diseases now constitute the primary health burden in most countries. Heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases cause the majority of deaths worldwide. Unlike infectious diseases that strike suddenly and resolve or kill quickly, chronic conditions develop gradually and persist for years or decades. Managing them requires sustained medication, lifestyle modification, and regular monitoring rather than curative interventions. The opioid epidemic in North America exemplifies medicine's complex relationship with pain management. Aggressive marketing of prescription opioids in the 1990s and 2000s, combined with inadequate understanding of addiction risk, led to widespread overprescribing. Millions became addicted to medications prescribed for legitimate pain, with many transitioning to illegal opioids when prescriptions ended. The crisis revealed failures in pharmaceutical regulation, medical education about addiction, and pain management approaches. Addressing it requires better pain treatments, improved addiction care, and systemic changes in how medicine approaches suffering. Antimicrobial resistance threatens to undermine decades of progress against infectious disease. Bacteria, fungi, and parasites evolve resistance to drugs through natural selection, accelerated by overuse and misuse of antimicrobials. Some bacterial strains resist all available antibiotics, rendering infections essentially untreatable. The World Health Organization identifies antimicrobial resistance among the top 10 global health threats, warning that routine surgeries and minor infections could again become life-threatening without effective antibiotics. Developing new antimicrobials receives insufficient commercial investment because antibiotics typically cure infections quickly rather than requiring lifelong use, making them less profitable than medications for chronic conditions. Novel approaches, including phage therapy, using viruses that infect bacteria, and antimicrobial peptides, mimicking natural immune defenses, show promise but require extensive development and testing. Mental health treatment has advanced significantly, yet remains inadequate to need. Understanding that depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and other mental disorders have biological bases alongside psychological and social dimensions has reduced stigma somewhat. New medications and psychotherapy approaches improve outcomes, but access remains limited, particularly in resource-constrained settings. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated mental health challenges globally, highlighting the interconnection between psychological and physical well-being. Precision medicine aims to tailor treatments to individual characteristics. Beyond pharmacogenomics, this approach considers environmental exposures, lifestyle factors, microbiome composition, and other variables affecting health and treatment response. Large biobanks collecting genetic and health data from hundreds of thousands of volunteers enable researchers to identify subtle patterns and associations impossible to detect in smaller studies. Global health initiatives have achieved remarkable successes alongside ongoing challenges. Smallpox eradication in 1980 proved that coordinated international effort could eliminate disease entirely. Polio neared eradication, with cases declining 99% since 1988, though final elimination remains elusive in a few countries. Guinea worm disease, once affecting millions, neared elimination through simple interventions including water filtration. Yet malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV still kill millions annually, predominantly in resource-limited settings. Neglected tropical diseases affecting the poorest populations receive inadequate research funding despite causing enormous suffering and disability. Climate change threatens to expand the geographic range of vector-borne diseases while disrupting health systems through extreme weather events, food insecurity, and forced migration. Contemporary medicine possesses tools and knowledge unimaginable to previous generations, yet faces challenges requiring solutions beyond purely technical innovation. Ensuring equitable access to beneficial treatments, managing healthcare costs, addressing social determinants of health, and preparing for emerging threats demand political will, international cooperation, and sustained commitment to health as a fundamental human right. Medicine stands at a threshold poised between reflecting on extraordinary achievements and confronting unprecedented possibilities. The trajectory from prehistoric healers gathering medicinal plants to contemporary physicians editing genes and programming immune cells represents one of humanity's most remarkable journeys. Yet the future promises transformations that may dwarf even the dramatic changes of the past century, raising questions about what it means to heal, how far intervention should extend, and who benefits from medical progress. Regenerative medicine seeks to repair or replace damaged tissues and organs rather than merely managing their decline. Stem cell research explores using these versatile cells, capable of developing into many different cell types, to regenerate heart muscle after heart attacks, restore insulin-producing cells in diabetes, or repair spinal cord injuries. Early clinical applications show promise, with stem cell treatments already used for certain blood disorders and burns. The potential extends far beyond current capabilities, however, with researchers envisioning growing entire organs from patient cells, eliminating transplant rejection and organ shortage simultaneously. Three-dimensional bioprinting represents one approach to tissue engineering. Specialized printers deposit living cells layer by layer according to digital designs, creating structures mimicking natural tissues. Simple tissues like skin and cartilage have been successfully bioprinted, while complex organs containing multiple cell types and intricate blood vessel networks remain challenging. The vision of printing replacement organs on demand edges closer to reality, though significant technical and biological obstacles remain. Nanotechnology promises medical interventions at molecular scales. Nanoparticles designed to seek specific targets could deliver chemotherapy directly to tumours while sparing healthy tissue, reducing the devastating side effects that make cancer treatment so difficult to endure. Nanoscale sensors could detect disease biomarkers at extremely low concentrations, enabling diagnosis before symptoms appear. Theoretical nanorobots might one day patrol blood vessels, clearing arterial plaques, destroying pathogens, or repairing cellular damage. While much remains speculative, nanoparticle drug delivery systems already exist, demonstrating feasibility. Brain-computer interfaces explore direct connections between neural tissue and electronic devices. Current applications help paralyzed individuals control prosthetic limbs or computer cursors through thought alone, restoring some capability to those with severe disabilities. Future interfaces might treat neurological conditions, enhance cognitive function, or enable forms of communication bypassing traditional sensory channels. The ethical implications of such technologies, particularly regarding identity, privacy, and human enhancement, provoke intense debate. Personalized medicine continues evolving toward ever finer individualization. Rather than treating disease categories, future medicine may design unique therapeutic approaches for each patient based on their complete genomic sequence, microbiome composition, environmental exposures, and real-time physiological monitoring. Wearable sensors already track heart rate, activity, sleep, and other metrics continuously. Future devices may monitor blood chemistry, hormone levels, and inflammatory markers, alerting individuals and physicians to problems before they become serious. Artificial intelligence will likely play expanding roles in diagnosis, treatment planning, drug discovery, and patient monitoring. Machine learning systems may identify disease patterns in multidimensional data sets too complex for human analysis, predict individual treatment responses with increasing accuracy, and accelerate development of new therapies by simulating molecular interactions computationally. The challenge lies in ensuring these powerful tools serve patients rather than replacing human judgment and compassion essential to healing. Longevity research investigates fundamental mechanisms of aging, questioning whether growing old inevitably means declining health. Understanding cellular senescence, the process by which cells stop dividing and accumulate damage, suggests potential interventions to slow or reverse aspects of aging. Clearing senescent cells in animal studies improves health and extends lifespan, raising possibilities that human aging might be modifiable rather than immutable. Whether extending lifespan without extending healthy years proves beneficial remains uncertain, but research increasingly treats aging itself as addressable rather than inevitable. Pandemic preparedness has gained urgency following COVID-19. Developing platform technologies enabling rapid vaccine creation against novel pathogens, maintaining surveillance systems detecting emerging diseases early, and building surge capacity in healthcare systems represent critical priorities. The pandemic demonstrated that infectious disease remains a major threat despite antibiotics and vaccines, that global interconnection spreads pathogens rapidly, and that preparedness requires sustained investment even during periods without active crises. Global health equity presents perhaps medicine's most pressing challenge. The gap between what's possible and what's accessible continues widening as sophisticated treatments grow more expensive. Gene therapies costing millions per patient, targeted cancer drugs requiring continuous use, and high-tech diagnostics remain beyond reach for most of humanity. Addressing this requires political commitment, innovative financing mechanisms, technology transfer, and questioning whether profit-driven pharmaceutical development adequately serves global health needs. Climate change threatens health in multiple ways. Expanding ranges of disease-carrying insects bring malaria, dengue, and other vector-borne diseases to new regions. Extreme heat events cause thousands of deaths annually, with vulnerable populations, including elderly individuals and those with chronic conditions facing greatest risk. Air pollution from fossil fuel combustion causes millions of premature deaths. Food system disruptions from changing weather patterns threaten nutrition. Medicine must adapt to these challenges while advocating for climate action addressing root causes. Ethical questions multiply as capabilities expand. Gene editing could eliminate inherited diseases, but also enable selecting for desired traits, raising concerns about designer babies and exacerbating inequality. Life extension technologies might be available only to wealthy individuals, creating unprecedented disparities. Artificial intelligence in healthcare raises questions about accountability when algorithms make errors, about data privacy in an era of comprehensive health monitoring, and about maintaining human connection in increasingly automated care. The relationship between patient and healer, fundamental to medicine throughout history, faces transformation in an age of technology and specialization. The ancient trust between one seeking help and one offering it persists, but often dispersed among teams of specialists, mediated through electronic systems, and complicated by healthcare becoming commercialized and bureaucratized. Preserving compassion, communication, and human dignity amid technological sophistication remains essential. Looking forward, medicine's trajectory seems clear in broad outline, if uncertain in specifics. Technology will continue advancing, understanding deepening, capabilities expanding. Diseases currently untreatable will yield to new interventions. Lives will be extended, suffering reduced, and health improved for many. Yet medicine's fundamental purpose endures unchanged from ancient healers to future practitioners, relieving suffering, restoring function, and supporting those facing illness, injury, and mortality. The story of medicine is ultimately a human story, reflecting our determination to help one another, our curiosity about how bodies work, our creativity in developing solutions, and our compassion for those who suffer. From Mesopotamian physicians recording treatments on clay tablets to contemporary researchers editing genes with molecular scissors, the thread connecting all medical practitioners across millennia is the commitment to healing. Whatever forms medicine takes in coming decades and centuries, this essential purpose will continue guiding those who devote themselves to caring for the sick and advancing human health. As medicine's capabilities grow ever more powerful, wisdom in their application becomes increasingly important. The challenge facing future generations is not merely developing new treatments, but ensuring they serve human flourishing, remain accessible to all who need them, and respect both individual dignity and collective well-being. Medicine's greatest achievements may yet lie ahead, but realizing them fully requires not just scientific brilliance, but also moral clarity, social commitment, and enduring dedication to healing as medicine's highest calling.